Hey, welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. It is Wednesday, December 8th, and all sorts of breaking news in Buckeye Nation. Alex Stiles, Sonny Stiles, has announced that he is going to reclassify, sign on Wednesday the 15th, be part of the 2022 class. We will touch on that in a separate show. But I want to go to some more important news. I don't know if I want to say more important, but something that we learned about on Tuesday. Ohio State has a new defensive coordinator coming in. And while Jim Knowles, formerly of Oklahoma State, will not take any sort of part within the program until January 2nd, we do know Ryan Day has come out, said that the move has been made. We don't know what's going to happen with the coaching dominoes, but I want to talk to a friend of the show. I want to talk to Eli Lederman of the Tulsa World. Had the opportunity to talk to Eli since he came out of journalism school. He just so happens to be now covering Oklahoma State, so just a happy coincidence. Eli, welcome to the show.
It's a melding of worlds. I mean, who would have thought, even waking up yesterday that we'd have a little Oklahoma State, Ohio State connection.
Yeah, OSU and OSU, but Ohio State obviously coming off of a season where the defense was not what Ohio State was used to. Ohio State does what it's used to doing, going out and finding the biggest name that it can to fill a deficiency, and it lands with Jim Knowles, now former defensive coordinator for Oklahoma State. You've had the opportunity to cover the Cowboys. What would you say was the identity of this Knowles-led defense, and what did this defense really hang its hat on?
Well, it was a defense that was sort of a slow burn. It was not, he arrived in 2018, and I think Oklahoma State has its reputation as a Big 12 team that would score 55 points a game and hope it didn't give up 56. And he really transformed this defense, but it took some time. It was not immediate, but it was a slow progression. And then in year 4, 2021, Oklahoma State emerged as arguably one of the best defenses in the entire country. As far as what they hung their hat on, what they did well, I think, from Jim Knowles' perspectives, it was the disguises that he featured. They didn't really give much away, and so there'd be times he'd rush 3 and drop 8 back, or disguise a blitz with a safety, and he really made use of all the talent he had on a very experienced and talented defense. A lot of the guys that made this defense what it was this year were in that very first meeting with him 4 years ago as underclassmen. And so he really, I think, developed an identity within that group of sort of a herd mentality, a group mentality that made its way into, the locker room and that defensive unit. But then you saw it on the field with an experienced group of guys who came into their own in sort of their last year and boosted Jim Knowles to the point where he could get a job like this Ohio State one.
Right, and you said it was a bit of a slow burn. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It got better. I mean, obviously, players had been in the system and had the opportunity to learn under Coach Knowles. What do you talk about the disguises? Not showing too much, being able to try, do a lot of things. Is that really the biggest thing that kind of changed with the defense through the years? Because, I mean, we can look at the stats and just how it just, got better and better and better. And then lo and behold, suddenly we're not making fun of every Big 12 team for being offense only and no defense as Oklahoma State team comes out and plays, legitimate top defense. What do you think some of the biggest changes were?
Well, he said it. I was thinking about this yesterday. Jim Knowles said in August of training camp, and we all know the kind of storylines that come out in August. Teams say a lot of things, but it's hard to really know what the truth is. But Jim Knowles said that this year 4, was finally when he got to get, I think he used the number 85% of what he really wanted to implement. It just took time. And I don't know what that's going to mean at Ohio State, but it took him time to implement what he wanted here and to adjust himself. I think that was another thing. He had to adjust to coaching in the Big 12 and going up against Big 12 offenses. So it took some time, I think, to implement what he wanted and to maybe find that happy medium. And maybe that's I don't know about a point of concern, because there's obviously, I think, some more talent, but also more urgency at Ohio State. But I think it took time for him to really, I guess, build as much the culture as it was the defense with the scheme and all that.
We understand that rankings and ratings are subjective, and there's a lot, sometimes you have guys that just come out of areas that maybe don't get represented well enough in the rankings, they're not seen. But certainly if you just look at the star ratings for Oklahoma State, a lot of 2 stars, 3 stars, sprinkling in a couple of guys that may be on the bottom of, those top 200 lists. What do you think Jim Knowles will be able to do with a roster that is, at least in terms of stars, significantly deeper, significantly, has a much higher top end? I mean, Ohio State obviously had its issues, dealing with some injuries, dealing with having to do a coaching change mid-season in terms of who was calling the defenses. But, here in year one, I mean, it's kind of, all bets are off. You don't really know what's going to be the case in 22, but he's going to have a lot more raw talent to work with.
Absolutely. I think, he's probably licking his lips looking at that depth chart and the type of talent that he's going to have to work with. And for me, watching what he did this year and how creative he was with his schemes. And again, those disguises where offenses didn't know it was coming at them until it was coming at them. And so I think that makes this a really good match where I just have, I was wondering about this is I I think what made this defense and what made the buy-in so strong here at Oklahoma State was the fact that he was working with a lot of guys from the state of Oklahoma who might have been overlooked, 2 stars, 3 stars, guys who didn't have a lot of offers. His probably his best defensive player, Malcolm Rodriguez, the linebacker, he had one offer from Wyoming until Oklahoma State came and plucked him out, and that was before Jim Knowles' time. But he had a defense full of guys who had probably been overlooked or felt that way. And I think that played into this kind of group mentality where they were willing to buy into an old school coach who even all these guys admitted was an acquired taste who took some time to adjust to. But once they did, I mean, it was great. But I do wonder, he's going to be walking into a very different room, probably a lot of 4-star, 5-star guys. And from a personality standpoint, that might be a pretty interesting dynamic.
Strangely enough, as all this news is breaking, Jim Knowles was at the Broyles Award ceremony, the award given to the top assistant coach in the nation. Knowles didn't win it. A guy from that school up north did, Josh Gaddis. Another time, another place on that discussion. But you had the opportunity to spend some time with Jim Knowles as this was all kind of coming together. So, you're talking to him, you're getting some one-on-one time in terms of interviews, and all this is going on. Just how crazy have the last 24, 36 hours been?
Yeah, it was a crazy day yesterday at the end of what's been a crazy season. So it just felt like another day in the life this year. But I didn't know it at the time, but what proved to be Jim Knowles' last morning as the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State with him in Little Rock at the Broyles Award ceremony. And what I can say, I spoke to him, and it was before the report came out yesterday that Ohio State had targeted him, and a few hours later he was, Ryan Day had his statement out, but what I can say is he was really gracious and honored to be here. And what Ohio State is getting is a coach who really is he's a coach's coach, I guess maybe would be the way of putting it. He called yesterday an event honoring assistant coaches, his Christmas, and was really, looked back and thanked all of his coaches. And he has an appreciation, I think, for what he does and the relationships with his players. And I would say that, for any doubt I might have cast over, him, his personality and what he's stepping into in Columbus, he hung his hat on the relationships with his players. That was, I think, as much the secret sauce in this defense this year as anything. And so he's going to forge those relationships. And I think those guys, if they can adjust to his style and can get behind a coach who's a little bit old school, they're going to love him too. And like I said, that was as important as maybe the personnel or the scheme or anything else this year. Is that this defense was really bought into Jim Knowles.
I went on Twitter. I was following your Twitter account, seeing kind of what you were tweeting and who you were retweeting, because I don't know the Oklahoma State defensive personnel all that well. But, I saw some tweets from players, a lot of people very excited for Coach Knowles and the opportunity. Obviously, some disappointment that Oklahoma State wasn't able to retain him. But, what's kind of, what have you kind of gathered from that? And what's the mood around Cowboys fans based on this? Because obviously Mike Gundy had come out and said, we're going to make every attempt to keep him. And it doesn't sound like Oklahoma State came up short and that they're like, well, we're not going to try and keep him. This sounds like maybe Ohio State was able to offer some things that Oklahoma State wasn't.
Yeah, I think on that front, we don't know, really what the true numbers were, what got put in front of Jim Knowles here in Stillwater in terms of staying. But I'm not sure this was really about the money. I asked Jim this yesterday, and again, the timing was rather fortuitous. I asked him in 2018 when he came from Duke, East Coast guy coming to Stillwater, Oklahoma. I asked why. I'm an East Coast guy now in Stillwater, Oklahoma, but I asked him what he was looking for, and he said a challenge. He wanted to grow, he wanted to be challenged, and all that. And 4 years later, he was sitting there at the Broyles Award ceremony, one of the top assistants in the country. And I think what Ohio State represented, I'm certain he's getting paid better. But I think it was really about just that next challenge, and I don't think he could turn down the opportunity for what Ohio State had to offer again on top of the financials. But here in Stillwater, I mean, people are certainly disappointed. I don't think there's anybody who feels maybe like the folks in Norman do about their coach up and leaving. I think everyone understands this, and Jim Knowles built up a lot of goodwill here. So there's disappointment, but understanding. And now for Mike Gundy, I think you could argue this is the biggest hire he's maybe ever made. Sits in front of him because this team, does not have the surefire offense it once had, and that personnel. But really, it reached the heights it did this year, being on the cusp of the playoff and reaching the Big 12 title game on a defense that carried them. And I think that's the way the Big 12 is going. So to carry over this momentum, to make this next hire right, I think is really important for Mike Gundy, and it's going to be interesting to see what direction that goes.
When Ohio State moved on from Greg Schiano, they bring in Jeff Hafley, and nobody expected that to be a one-year deal. He ends up having a tremendous year turning around the Ohio State defense, and then is off to Boston College. And I think everybody knew with a young coach like Jeff Hafley that head coaching was in his future. What is your feeling with Jim Knowles, 56 years old? Did you ever get the impression that he wanted to lead his own program? You know, there are just some guys. Ohio State has Larry Johnson, who's been a lifetime coordinator, and he's going to retire as a coordinator here at some point. Do you think that Knowles is somebody who has head coaching aspirations? His 56 is still pretty. I mean, I'm 50, so I hope 56 is still young. But do you think he's got head coaching aspirations as Ohio State fans go, oh, I hope it's just not another one-year rental?
You know, that's a question I was thinking about this fall, because as much as we were talking about Jim Knowles potentially, and this was the outcome, getting poached by a bigger program to remain a coordinator, there were talks about him as a head coach. And I would probably lean toward him sticking around, at least not necessarily chasing a head coaching role. I think he likes what he's doing right now as a coordinator, and that's a role that fits him. And I also think he's going to want to build something there. I don't think he's going to Ohio State for a one-year deal to then vault to a head coaching job. But I could be wrong. But the reality is he's been doing this coaching for something like 30 years and only spent 5 or 6 of those as a head coach, and that was at Cornell. And I think it would really have to be the right job. One of those jobs might have been Duke, where he spent 8 seasons as a defensive coordinator, and that job is open right now. And so there were certainly some links there that people made. But I think he's going to get to Columbus and really is going to want to build something and build toward playoff contention and all that stuff he wasn't getting here.
I was watching the Big 12 championship game. I think it was on that telecast, and I think it was Kirk Herbstreit saying that, had the opportunity to spend some time with Jim Knowles, and like during practice, he walks around with a coffee cup, and I think it said something along the lines of, "That ain't it." And when something doesn't work out or whatever, he doesn't have to raise his voice or whatever. He just taps the mug. I mean, is that a story that has gotten some news around there? I mean, what you talk about him maybe being an acquired taste for some of the players. What is he like to deal with?
Well, I mean, he really couldn't be more. And I guess there's the way I deal with him and the ways his own players deal with him. They probably see a nastier side at times when things aren't going right. But that was just one of the many quirks. The mug, he wears these Vans, like these shoes, and he doesn't put his feet all the way in. He steps on the backs of them and just walks around in them almost like slippers. So he slides in, slides out. He was described as the mad scientist, and people would go into his office, and it's not a modern desk setup where he's got 4 monitors. It's just a messy desk with notes and pads and everything everywhere. But it works for him, and it worked for this Oklahoma State defense. And so he's certainly a character. But as I kind of said when we're talking about the Broyles Award stuff, he truly cares. He cares about what he's doing. He cares about kind of the art of coaching, I think. And he was speaking yesterday about all that's been given to him by coaches for free, and now he's paying that back, and that's what he wants to spend his life doing. And so he's he's got his things, he's got his mug, he's got his shoes, and he's got his messy desk. But the bottom line is that he's a guy who I think more so than maybe some in this industry he cares about coaching, and he's going to care about these guys. And it may come down to the relationships he can build with them as far as the success that they have.
A question that we didn't talk about before the interview, but I'll still kind of ask. I think everybody sees Ryan Day's staff, and everybody is just this humongous designated recruiter. You can't be on Ryan Day's staff if you can't recruit. And I know that, there's a line, you either cover the team or you cover recruiting. There are very few guys that cover both. But what's your impression of Jim Knowles, the recruiter?
Yeah, I mean, they've not made any like massive big splashes, going out and getting a 5-star from Texas that blew the doors off of things in Stillwater during his time here. But they recruited effectively, and I think what maybe what stood out was that he got the guys he needed. He knew, I think, the right personnel to bring in, given the limitations here. When you're kind of swimming in those 3-star, 4-star waters, I think it's just as important to know, to bring in the right guys, not just, the highest rated, this or that. He found the guys that fit his defense. And again, that was something that by year 4, he kind of plugged in all the pieces through the portal and through recruiting to a defense that finished 3rd in the country in total defense and led the nation in sacks and tackles for loss. So I think he'll figure out, I guess, the right pieces to bring in. And again, he's going to be operating under some different advantages at Ohio State than he had here.
Last question. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on the Big Me Kickoff. People say that Ohio State already kind of has its cheat code on offense with Ryan Day as the offensive mind. Would you sit there and say that with Ohio State bringing in somebody of the caliber and the resume of Jim Knowles, that maybe that they have their cheat code on defense? And that doesn't necessarily mean that having the plan that players are always going to be able to execute it, but do you think that this is a kind of move that could match what they have offensively and potentially make this a more complete team?
I think so. I think, you mentioned that Ryan Day went out and got a big name. He went out and got, I think, as good a defensive coordinator as he could have coming off the year Jim Knowles just had. We'll see about fit and about, as you said, you can have the best plan in place and are the players going to execute it. All those variables remain. There's no perfect surefire hire, but I think the Buckeyes went out and got probably the best guy they could have.
There you go. There you have it. So we'll have to wait a little bit before we get to see Jim Knowles in Columbus. He's going to finish out the season with the Oklahoma State Cowboys in their bowl game. Ohio State will finish out its season with the Rose Bowl on January 1st. January 2nd, we'll see the transition happen. What happens there? Will more coaches leave? Will more coaches come in? We won't know, but keep it locked in here at Buckeye Scoop as we will have all the latest. Eli, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all for watching here on the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. We're on twice a week. Look for me to come back on Friday. We'll figure something out. We'll talk Army, Navy, maybe talk Sonny Styles, and get ready for National Signing Day. All that and more. Talk to you soon.